So I'm going to do this in the same folder that I have here. What I also want to do is to sort of go through the steps of creating an Express application. You've seen it. You've done it. Let's do it one more time. Fairly simplistic Express application. The only big difference, and it's a big difference, is that we're going to be hitting a database with this Express app. Okay? So there is going to be some asynchronicity that we're going to have to deal with that we haven't had to deal with before, because everything that we've done with Express has been instantaneous because everything's been in memory. Once we end up doing any sort of I/O, any input-output, connecting with an external resource, if that library isn't built with some asynchronicity or callback functions, or what we'll find out also can be promises, then it's probably not that great a library, because it's going to lock us up, because again, for the most part, when we think about Node, for all intents and purposes, it's single-threaded. And again, Express is a Node application. So what I want to do here is I'm going to install a couple of things that I know I need. Okay, first of all, let me do an npm init. Default settings. And I'm going to install Express. I'm also going to need to send up some data in a form. So I know I'm going to need body parser. Okay? I'm also going to need to interact with a database, which is going to be Sqlite3. So there's an npm module for Sqlite3. This we actually want to have within our project when we deploy it. So Sqlite3, if you saw this, you could sort of rest assured it's probably a pretty decent package, the number of people that are downloading it in the past day. So we're going to take these three modules, we're going to install them, and I'm going to do save. Yeah. So I've got these three modules. I'm going to keep this relatively simple here. Once I end up getting these three modules, I'm going to do this with, I'm actually going to need a templating engine too, and I'll install Swig because I've kind of got used to using that. So let me also go over here, npm install Swig, save. Again, you've seen this a bunch of times before, so I'm going to go through it rather quickly. And let me open this up, my editor of choice. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to add a server.js. And in my server.js, or rather, let's actually say in my package.json, I'm going to do a start dev. So when I'm starting in my development environment, I'm going to run nodemon, and I'm going to specify that what I want to run is server.js. So as I start changing my server file, it'll end up rerunning. And once I end up doing that, I could go over here and say nodemon start, I have that wrong, sorry, npm run start dev. And it'll find that server.js file, it'll sit there, and it'll just wait. So if I was to go into my server.js and do something simple, console.log, hello, and come back out here, I would see that that would end up outputting hello. Now, I don't want to do hello. What I want to do is create an Express server. So I'm going to get Express, require Express. Okay? I'm going to get my body parser, require my body parser. I'm going to end up getting Swig, require Swig. I'm going to set my Swig defaults. I usually like to do this right here. Swig, set defaults. Cache is false because I'm going to be making changes to my template files. I'm going to create my Express app. My Express app is going to be my app, and simply calling the method Express creates the Express app. I don't have any routes set up for this. I'm going to set that up in a second. But one of the things that I'm going to specify is I'm going to say app.set view engine. I want it to look for HTML extensions, and I want it to use the HTML view engine. I want it to use the HTML renderer, I should say. Luckily, I can say app.engine. You know how I remember it's engine instead of engines? Did it 1,000 times. Okay? So here I'm going to specify swig render file. Okay? Again, this is more than you would necessarily have to write, but this is going to allow me to do something like app.get / request response next, and I'm just going to say response.render index. Okay? This is basically response.render is going to say, well, what is the name of my file that I want to render? The view engine is HTML. It's going to look for an index.html by default inside of the views directory. And it's going to basically marry up what I send after here, which in fact is nothing, to that template, which is fine for now. I'm going to put some other stuff in a bit. So, of course, I've got to listen. So I'm going to go over here, and I'll say port equals process environment port or 3000, and I'll specify that I want to listen on this port. And also I'll do console.log, and I'll specify listening on port $port. And if we do that, it'll say it's listening on 3000. And if I were to go over here and say localhost 3000, I'd get an error that it can't find this index file. And I'm going to go in here. Again, by default, it looks in a folder called views. This is something you could modify. Keep this real simple. We're not even going to have a layout file. Index.html. And if I go back and I run this, it'll find this file, which is now empty. And let me go in here and start putting in some HTML. So I'm going to have an HTML tag. This is going to be a very, very simple application. Again, all I want to demonstrate is how within a Node application you could access a Sqlite database. I'm going to put my head tag here, closing head tag here. I could put a title here. And I'm going to go over here and put a body tag in. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put in a text area. I'm going to give this a name of SQL. And I'll give it a style. I'll say my width is going to be 100%. And my height is going to be 20%. So text area, you could end up typing into it. So if I just go to reload this, I should see that I've got this big text area that I could type into it. Again, what I want to do is actually start typing in some SQL that I could hit an enter button and then hit the database. Well, one thing that I want to do here is I want to put this in a form, okay? And the method is going to be post. I want to basically post this SQL. And I want to end up going in and posting this SQL. By the way, I don't have to put an action in, because if you don't put an action in, it's going to post to whatever the current URL is. And you can actually see this, where if I go over here, and I'm going to put in a button, type is going to be a submit button. It's within a form value, and I'm going to say run query. So now I've got this button. Let me just add a little bit of margin here. So I'll say margin bottom 10 pixels. So I have a little bit of room to work. But the second that I do this and I run this query, it'll say I can't post to slash. So just to see if we could get our data here, let's go and start setting up this route. So I've got a GET request. Our post is going to be a little bit more complicated. So we're going to do a post, request, response next. I'm going to put this on multiple lines. That's why I'm going to put in these squiggly braces here. And all I'm going to do at this point is say response.send request.body. Okay? And if I do that and I go back here, I'll load this here. I'm going to type something in here. And I'm not going to get any errors, but this is going to be empty. Reason why it's empty is that I'm not actually able to do anything. My request body is empty because don't forget, Express doesn't have a high opinion of how it's going to be getting its data. So I've got to specify, hey, look, Express, I want you to use body parser, the URL encoded version, because that's how our form comes in. And just so I don't get a message that tells me I need to do this, I'm going to say extended is false. And that just, what that is that there's different ways to parse your form data, and this is sort of the lighter way of parsing it.
What would you use? JSON? Body parser JSON?
I would use JSON if I was actually in a little bit more of control over my request, and I was making AJAX requests to the server.
So it's something that we're not using.
We're not doing it yet. Okay? So once I end up doing that, and I go back here, in fact, I could probably even just reload this. And now I could see that I'm actually getting my SQL. Okay? Just to sort of start this off, let's say that I'm actually going to go and I'm going to render the index. But this time what I'll do here is I'll put in my SQL. I'll just sort of echo it back by saying request.body.SQL. So now, if I went back here and I put something in, I'm back to a blank page. But if I modify my template, and this is why you don't want to cache your templates, what I could do here is go in here and use my Swig templating engine to put in my SQL. And now, if I run that again, I'll see that this stays back here. So I'm just echoing it out. Okay? Now, what I really want to do is I want to run some SQL. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to use my Sqlite3, which I can use. I did an npm install of this, and I'll say Sqlite equals require Sqlite3. Just so I don't have to write Sqlite3 all the time. And what I'm going to do here, so now what I can do is that I can programmatically, there's an API for Sqlite3 in this library where I can access the database. So you see actually you can access the database a couple of different ways. You could access it right off the command line. You could put stuff in a file. But I could also access it within a Node application by specifying that what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database, which is going to be a new Sqlite database. All it has to know is the name of the database, and I'm going to hard code this at this point, and this is going to be my Acme Sqlite. This will work because it's in the same file. Okay?
And normally you would create a route for that.
Normally I would create a route.
Would you leave it and say, you know how sometimes you set up a route and it goes, you're like mounting a...
Yeah, you know, this is simplistic enough that I'm not. If I had a home page and I had another page for queries, then maybe I would mount a route for queries. This is a very simplistic one URL application.
I'm talking about like a weekend project.
That's right. If I had a diagram up and I said, hey, it would depend on what I was asking you to do. Right? For this project, if I showed you, hey, look, here's what I want this project to do, there's no reason to set up any other routes.
Okay.
Okay? So what I'm doing here, let's just see whether or not this gives me any sort of errors, which it doesn't look like it's doing here. By the way, there's callbacks you could put in here. If I put a callback in here, this will give me an error if there's some error reading the database. If I say console.log, error here, it'll tell me no, meaning it was okay. I was able to read from the database. There aren't that many errors, by the way, you could get here. Because again, if the database doesn't exist, it'll end up just creating the database for you. We have a database that exists that we've populated with data. So what I want to do here quite simply is instead of actually coming right back here, what I want to do is I want to say, hey, look, my database, okay, I want to actually run a SQL statement. I want to query the database. So I'm going to start out by doing this. Okay? db.all says, what is it that you want to run? And I'll say select star from users. Eventually I'll get this from my query. Select star from users. This will end up giving me back, and I'm going to put this on 2 lines. Okay? This will end up doing one of 2 things. I'll either get an error or I'll get a set of results. Okay? So all means you basically want to run a query and you're going to be getting a result set. Just as an aside, if I was to go over here and say console.log results, and I'm going to take this and put this in here because I really want to end up rendering my results. I don't want to go back to the client until I've ran this query. Again, we haven't done this yet. We haven't had an I/O situation with data, but we will very shortly. Again, I'm trying to marry together the SQL part and the Express part, so you can see how these 2 things go together. So now if I end up doing this, and I go back here and I just click Run Query, okay, notice I see my results. By the way, let me modify this and go over here and also log my error, which I'm not going to have any. So if I go back here and I run this, I'll see that I didn't have any error opening the database. Here are my results, and I don't have any errors when I'm reading from the database. Now let's create an error. Let's go over here and we'll say select star from user.
Can you just scroll up for just a minute?
Minute's a long time, but
Less than that. Okay. That's fine.
right, so here's basically where I created the data. And this part, for now, is not that important. I just wanted to open up this to you. If you needed to make sure that the database that you were able to connect, that's where you would end up putting in some logic. Okay? Again, we don't really have to worry about that. And the reason why we don't have to worry about that is that by the time even if it's almost instantaneous, by the time that we end up loading the page, we already have a connection to our database. It's not going to take seconds and seconds to connect to the database. It's going to be instantaneous. Okay? So now, if I end up doing this, I say run query. Okay? It specifies no such table for the user. Right, I've got a SQLite error. So what I want to do here is pretty simply, what we're going to do is we'll go over here and we'll just specify when we get back here, we'll say results equals results, and we'll say error equals whatever the error was that we got back. So I'll go over here, and in fact, let's actually make it a little bit more useful. So what we'll end up doing here is that instead of hard-coding this select, we could go over here and I could say const SQL equals request.body.SQL, and here we could end up specifying SQL, in which case we could use our shorthand here by doing this. Perfectly legitimate. It'll end up creating a key with SQL with this value of SQL as well. And so if we end up running this and we go back over here, let's start out with our error. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to put underneath my form, I'm going to say if error. End if. And I'm going to go over here and I'll specify that I've got a div, and I'm going to give it a style, real simple stuff. Color is red, and I'll display the error. So if I have an error, I'm going to do that. Let's set it up so that we have an error. We'll go over here. By the way, if we wanted to, right now, every time that I reload the page, it'll end up doing my post, which maybe is fine. Notice it just tells me I have an error, but it just says object. If I go over here, one of the things that Sqlite3 allows me to do, or excuse me, not Sqlite3. What Swig allows me to do is to say, hey, look, give me this data as JSON data. So it'll tell me SQLite error. By the way, notice I don't see the error. What's kind of interesting about this is that people can set up their objects. What it's doing, when we say JSON, what it's doing is that there are certain keys in that object that are enumerable. You could set this up because, again, what does it mean to say JSON? It means, in essence, really, it's enumerating over the keys and giving you the values. So we've got a key of error number, and we've got a code. And it's giving us sort of minimal information. This took me a while to sort of get, but I'm actually going to also put in here message. All I'm getting at there is sometimes when you don't see the data that you're looking for, it's there, but you just don't realize that it's there. Now, if I run this again, I'll see the error is actually telling me in your CCC we've got a syntax error. Let's actually go over here and we'll say select star from users. Run it. That's a good command, right? So we don't see an error. Let's say select star from user. Okay, no such table user. Okay, now let's deal with our results. So we'll put another if here. We actually don't even need an if. We're just going to put a for result in results. And we'll put an end for, again, I'm not even using Bootstrap or anything like that. Here I'm going to put in a div. And I'll go over here and I'll say result. And again, this is going to be an object. So if I run this, I put in users. It tells me I've got 3 objects because I've got 3 users. But I'm going to go over here and specify, hey, look, I want to get this user as JSON data. So now I've got my users with my IDs, and I could do all kinds of things here. I could say select users.name from users, join departments, on departments.manager ID equals users.id. I could run that. I'll get my 2 usernames, but if I want the department as well, see, this is where you run into a problem. If I just say departments.name, no such column, departments.name. So here I just get the name of the department. So again, because I'm just using name for both of these, so here you would say as department name. And if I did this, I'd see the name of my user and the department name, or I could do as manager name. So this is very, very simplistic. I think everyone would agree that this is not a lot of code here. We got 26 lines with ample spacing. We've got 1 index file. The big takeaway here, is that what we're able to do is from within our Node application, we're able to run a query. Okay? So we end up using our Sqlite3. That allows us to make a connection to the database. Okay? Underlying this, it's making a connection to the database. And once we have a connection to the database, we could do db.all. There's a couple of things you could do with db. Okay? You could actually execute multiple statements. You could actually do inserts, updates, and deletes. All we want to do is run a query. So we're going to end up doing all. And all I've done here is given you a sort of test harness where if you have a SQLite database, you could end up using this to run your queries to see if your results make sense. I'll throw one other thing out at you, just so you can see this. Let's just say I wanted to do something like select count from users. Okay? I want to do select count from users. I could run that. Notice I get a result, okay, but it's only one result. But I could do as number of users. Okay? The point that I'm getting at is that when you're running something, when you end up doing an aggregate like this or a count like this, you just have to be aware of what your result set is going to look like. So again, you only have one result, and this is going to give you your number of users. Okay? So what I want to do with this is I'm going to stop this recording.